Exciting news from Vinus, supporter of the Vincast. The iPhone app has just been updated and they can now help you find the wines you love even easier based on the wines you are uploading onto the app and sharing with your networks. They can actually tailor special deals and help you find wines that you've actually loved and give you the specific kind of products you're after, the ones you enjoy. So all you need to do is make sure you are going on to www.getvinus.com/Vincast, download the iPhone app, start snapping away, sharing those wines you enjoy and finding out other wines that you'd like to try based on what other people have said. And they'll collect that data and they can help you source the wines that you should be drinking. Vinus revolutionizes the way that we enjoy and share the wines we love. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Guestbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and it is great to have you on board yet again. And I am going to be away overseas for a few weeks. Through my job, obviously, I'll be at the Pro Wine and Vinitaly trade fairs and a couple of other things as well. So there might be a little bit of delay in episodes. I do apologise for that, but whilst I'm away, I'm going to be taking over my portable recording equipment. So hopefully I'll get the opportunity to chat with a few people or at least record some of my own experiences to share with you. But I do appreciate your patience whilst I'm away. For this episode, I invited a very respected wine merchant, both in the retail sense and also the distribution sense, Randall Pollard, who initially was known for his fantastic wine store in Geelong, but also began to import some beautiful wines from Europe to sell in the shop, but then he also started sharing them with other trade customers. So he talked about his background, how he got into wine, and what he loves about working with these kinds of wines. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Randall, thank you so much for making some time to be on the Vincast.
It's a pleasure.
And obviously you are pretty well known, particularly in Melbourne, in the wine game for a number of different reasons. Obviously, you have the retail story, and then the importing story as well. But I just wanted to sort of take you back. Can you remember what it was? Was there a particular wine or a moment that kind of made you want to follow a career path in wine?
Not particularly, I don't think, but I always have loved wine, even when I was 15. And when Mum and Dad went out for a night and I was at home with my younger sister, I'd often sneak up to the wine cask. And of course, you can't tell what volume's in the wine cask, so you can't tell if someone's stolen a glass of red wine.
That was one of the good things about Chateau Cardboard.
Yes, it was. And it was often the Wynn's wine cask, which you wouldn't remember, but it had a fake leather covering.
Really?
Yeah. Anyway, so I used to break out a piece of cheese, basic cheddar-style cheese, and have a glass of probably something called claret out of a wine cask. So
and it wasn't it was like you actually enjoyed.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
It wasn't just to up and be a sophisticated adult.
No, I loved it. I loved the flavour, even then, and that was basic wine, obviously. But then, I had a job in a bank when I was 17, and about a year and a half later, a mate said, "I'm going to New Zealand. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Yeah, I hate this job." So I went across to New Zealand, and I got a job, even though I was underage, in pubs and no such thing as RSAs then. And I got a job in.
Do they even have RSAs in New Zealand these days?
No, I'm not sure.
Just joking.
And then finally, I got a job in the Tourist Hotel Corporation, and moved around various hotels and started tasting international wines, New Zealand, Australian plus French wines.
Okay.
And I got a real interest for it then. I came back and I got in Brisbane. In about 81, 80, I got a job at a great restaurant called Milanos, which people...
Italian restaurant? I'm guessing?
It was more an international, but yes, it was. They were Italians.
Right.
Gino Merlo, whose brother started the coffee roasting business, which is very famous.
Sure.
They had an amazing wine list, and some people who have been around a bit longer still remember that place. It was table serve. I used to cook at the table, the crepe Suzettes and all that sort of thing. It's one of those places where I was wearing a tuxedo and carving roasts and cooking steak Diane and crepe Suzettes at the table and serving the wine as well.
God, it reminds me of some of those movies from the 80s, like, or set in the 80s, like Wall Street and Trading Places and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was very ritzy. Still, I never believed that a waiter can cook something as well as a chef in the kitchen.
Sure.
But there was a lot of theatre, and it was a lot of fun.
Are you originally from Queensland?
Yeah, I'm from Brisbane.
From Brisbane,
originally,
okay.
Yeah. But then I got such an interest there, tasting great wines, because Len Evans used to turn up for the single bottle club there quite regularly, and we get to taste the leftovers, and an amazing list that went back to Bordeaux's from the 30s and Burgundies from the 40s, and it was a fantastic list. It was about 60 pages long. Great old Penfolds, for example. And people used to regularly leave some behind for us to taste, which is great. And so then I went to Roseworthy and studied wine there for a couple of years.
Studied winemaking?
Wine production and marketing, it was called at that stage.
Okay.
It was the precursor for the wine marketing course that's there now.
Yeah, which I did the Masters of Wine Business, but pretty much, okay.
Yeah, but it involved more production and viticulture than the marketing course.
Did you have a concept of what you necessarily wanted to do in the wine industry, or you just sort of had that love, but working in that environment gave you the opportunity to be exposed to these pretty amazing wines, it sounds like?
Yes, I had no idea whatsoever what I wanted to do, but back then in 82, 83, wines were very cheap.
Sure.
And
even imported wines?
Even as a student, we could occasionally drink DRC and first grade Bordeaux. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And whenever one of our classmates had a birthday, we always drank Bollinger RD. We'd just whip into Adelaide and buy a bottle.
I'm going to warn you now, you are probably going to alienate yourself a little bit with all of the sommeliers and wine people of my generation.
Well, I apologise.
Oh, it's so unfair.
It is, I know, but people in 30 years' time are going to say the same about you. So
probably, yeah, I don't doubt it. The fact that I've actually been able to drink certain champagnes and burgundies in my very short career, in like you say, in 30 years, that can possibly going to be so unattainable.
Yeah, that's right.
Apart, partly because of price, but partly because of the scarcity of the wine.
Demand. They never get cheaper. Great wines of the world never get cheaper, relatively speaking.
I guess to a certain extent that is the nature of inflation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what was your experience? You were living on campus at Roseworthy. Roseworthy's sort of in the Barossa, isn't it?
It's near the Barossa.
Right.
I lived on campus for a short while, then got a house in Gawler, which is also very close to the Barossa.
Gateway to the north, isn't it? That's what they say.
Yes, it's an okay little place. And I had a part-time job in some restaurants. It was an exciting time for food, actually. We used to go regularly, and it was quite cheap to, I shouldn't admit that, to the Pheasant Farm.
Okay.
Maggie Beer's restaurant.
Right, there you go.
It was amazing.
Sure.
Really good value, and there were some really good things happening, like Chong Lu.
Yes.
In Adelaide was really starting out, and it was very interesting for food. Yeah, so we drank a lot, tasted a lot, and learned a lot. It was great fun. Did
you find you had a particular affinity with certain styles or wines from a certain country early on?
No, I was...
You were just so, thrilled to taste everything?
Everything, yeah. Sure. I just wanted to learn as much as possible and taste as many wines as possible. Mm-hmm. And
back in those days, where was quality generally coming from?
It's interesting. Back in those days, if someone gave you a bottle of Black Label Wolf Blass, you were beside yourself.
Sure.
But then again, Eschazeau was very affordable too. from the more the bigger production makers like Faverley, and everything champagne. Coonawarra was considered de rigueur. Redmond's,
Yeah, of course.
It's a very different marketplace now with a lot more smaller producers. And
just in the 10 or 11 years that I've been working in wine, it's changed significantly.
It's scary, isn't it? They're moving at a very fast pace.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, when I left Roseworthy, I got a job with Crittenden's.
Okay.
And I worked with them for a couple of years, and that then I moved into working for Coles, which is a very different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the buying office for Liquorland for Victoria.
Right.
And then not long after that, I started working for family business, Bannockburn Cellars in Geelong.
Okay.
So on the retail side of things, but they owned the vineyard as well.
No, I can imagine that at the time when you were working for the Coles Group and for Liquorland, it was probably a pretty different environment, particularly considering obviously the larger guys are moving towards sort of their own branded stuff and and negotiating those kind of things, and obviously importing their own stuff as well. How did you find it? What was the market like as far as distributors and producers and importers, that kind of thing?
Oh, it's far more basic then. They didn't have many of their own brands back then, except for spirits. The stores were very small, and they didn't have really...
This is even before Dan Murphy's sort of took
Dan
off.
Murphy's had one store.
Just the Alphington store?
Yeah, no, the Paran store.
Okay.
Yeah, the first one, so it was a very different ballgame. Brands, big company brands were very important.
Right.
And small wine merchants were very important back then.
Yeah.
Not so much now, especially in terms of volume, in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It was the brands of Penfolds and Hardys and Lindemans or Orlando were very, very popular.
Sure. And at that point, were there a lot of sort of distribution companies in Australia? Or we generally, as far as the locally produced wines, you were just going straight to the source?
No, most of them were, or a lot of them. Let me think back. It was a bit of both.
If you're working with the larger wineries, whether they're family owned or if they're corporate at that point, you generally would have been dealing with them directly, I would think. Yes,
back then we knew. Like I used to talk to Stephen Henschke, for example, and order wine from him, but he then put it through Tucker Seabrook or whoever the distributors were at the time.
Yeah,
but there weren't the small, quality-focused, passionate importers like there are now.
Mm-hmm.
Like every man and his dog imports wine these days, and it's
going to be interesting now that the Australian dollar's going down a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. Oh well,
but that's just the nature of fluctuations.
That's right. It will always fluctuate, and it can get a bit tougher. But we've also had it very good in terms of imported wine for quite a while now, and perhaps Australian wines have suffered a little bit. Seems like that's changing a bit though. Don't I get the feeling?
I think there's certainly a lot more excitement around Australian wine, even in the overseas markets, and you have, I guess, newer voices as far as wine communicators talking about, a new movement in Australian wine in terms, a lot of exciting young wine producers.
Yeah, it's great, and people pushing boundaries, making wines that are a little bit different. Pushing the skin contact, pushing the all different facets of production.
Yeah, it's certainly, there's a great opportunity to try a myriad of different styles, and obviously with different grape varieties being worked with as well, and some of them starting to get a bit of maturity as far as vine age.
Yep.
And express their site a little bit more interestingly, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're making a little wine at the moment, and Tessa Brown is making it for us up in Beechworth.
Yeah.
And Yeah, so we've had access to Fiano and
it's cool.
Pinot Grigio as well as Gewürztraminer.
I guess that's why my generation is lucky. We have
That's right.
a lot of exciting stuff.
Yeah,
and even imported as well.
Oh yeah, exactly. Oh, imported wine.
How much Jura wine would have been imported? When you were working
None
earlier on.
Absolutely none. And in fact, I joke with John Osbeeston. He was the first to import it, but I was the first to sell any. And it was just a timing thing.
Yeah.
He's imported some amazingly great wines over the years, and he's a great fellow. But he tried bringing in Domaine Stéphane Tissot.
Sure.
Didn't work for him. It was only a small amount, but yes, back when I was at Roseworthy, back in the dark ages, there was basically Bordeaux and Burgundy and not much in between. And even if you spoke to Len Evans at that time about Barolo, he'd turn away.
Wow.
Those guys didn't really like Italian wines back then, unless it was really great and really old.
What about Super Tuscan type stuff? Not even that?
No, not so much. No, there was not the same interest in that as there was in definitely Burgundy and Bordeaux.
They like the French bees rather than the Italian bees.
Yes.
And so when you went to work for Bannockburn, that was kind of when you made the shift down to that Geelong area?
Yes, it was a bit before then.
Okay.
And yeah, Geelong's a great spot, and I've only moved up to Melbourne in the last 3 years.
Right.
I've been there all that time, and but it is also good being in the thick of things up in Collingwood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Downtown Collingwood.
What were you doing at Bannockburn?
I was running the shop.
Right. Okay.
Which is in Geelong.
So like
Bannockburn Cellars, not Bannockburn Vineyards.
Oh,
same ownership though.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was a wine shop. It wasn't like a cellar door for Bannockburn.
No.
Okay.
It was a standalone wine shop, quite big actually.
Right. Okay.
And we developed it, and it was quite large.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of imported wines, a lot of specialty wines.
Sure.
A lot of expensive wines.
What sort of customers did you have in Geelong in those times?
Oh, lots of wine-interested customers from all walks of life, and also people travelling through, and also
on the way down to the Great Ocean Road.
Yeah, and also orders by fax, and which I don't own anymore.
Gosh, I can barely remember what the sound of a fax machine is.
Yes, and telephone, of course. Mm-hmm. And then I started
some
my
corporate orders.
Yes,
down the road at Ford.
Not so much, but. Then I started my own shop in 1999.
Right. Okay.
Which is still there.
And what was the idea? Was it sort of just to have your own thing and be able to hand select the wines yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Basically, it was just owned by me.
Right.
And I didn't have to please anyone else. I just had to please myself at the time. Which, so that was great. And then we started importing bits of wine. Was the
importing initially for the purpose of just stocking in the shop?
Exactly.
Or that was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you approach that? Obviously you would have had some very good relationships with, even then, some of the smaller importers and obviously the producers and distributors locally. Where did you see the opportunity as far as importing some of your own stuff? Was it just to be able to go and hand select it yourself?
Absolutely. Well, we still had the problems back then, in the early 2000s of not being able to get enough of the stuff you wanted.
Right.
The allocations were still pretty tight then. Mm-hmm. They're even more they're draconian now. I was speaking to someone the other day who's got a fantastic shop, and he said, he gets one bottle of DRC, and then the importers, it's not their fault. They just get so little. By the time they spread it out to all their customers, some customers get none, some customers get a bottle. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. So I went and found some great Burgundy producers and started importing them, because my passion was Burgundy. It still is Burgundy, and amongst other things now. But so I soon realised, though, very quickly, that I was going to lose the producers that I was importing if I didn't start to represent them to, other wine shops and the best restaurants.
Sure.
It's not fair to them, and in terms of marketing more so than volume. A lot of them don't care about volume; they're just happy to be in Australia. But
a lot of them wouldn't make that much anyway.
No, a lot of them.
They're all very small producers,
tight allocate. Milanos, we get 40 cases for Australia.
Sure.
And every year I ask if they've got more, and they say, well, if someone else says no, then you can have a little bit more. And
which is unlikely.
You know the way it works. You've got to wait for a disastrous vintage, and then take that opportunity to get some more, and then you get a little bit more from then on.
In the following vintages.
Yeah, that's right.
So, as far as that sort of starting point, how did you go about? Like, what sort of research were you able to do in terms of finding?
I probably do it the same way other people do it. It's just check out any source you can: books, websites, anecdotal, and magazines. Mm-hmm. And there are millions of those. Mm-hmm. Do a list of great producers, cross off the ones that are already imported. Mm-hmm. So you make a list of Burgundy producers, you put DRC at the top, maybe Loire, maybe Rousseau, and you start crossing them off, because they're imported, so there's no point in visiting for the purposes of importing wine yourself. Certainly very good to visit for education.
Pleasure, yeah.
Yeah, and pleasure, absolutely. One of the best winery visits I've ever done is DRC. I was with Jane Faulkner and Sally Gudgeon, which helped, because journos I think get looked after a little bit better. They're a little bit further up the food chain when it comes to visiting producers sometimes.
Well, unless you're the actual customer.
Yeah, well, I am the customer, and I've met my good friend Aubert a number of times, and we had a great visit because he showed us the vineyards and walked us through all the vineyards. And of course, he's very passionate about that. And then he took us for a barrel tasting, and then he took us to tasting in the cellar of blind DRC Echezeaux, which was fantastic, culminating in a La Tâche from the 30s. So it was fantastic. But anyway, so yeah, that's and having decided upon a list of producers to visit, then you just go and visit them all and choose the ones you want to choose.
I can imagine even then, compared to now, it probably would have been not as easy to get as much information. I mean, for example, now a lot of producers have their own websites, and then you can find websites for importers around the world and kind of look at what their portfolio is. And if you sort of see a lot of things you like, and then you see something that maybe isn't imported into Australia, you kind of go, oh, okay, well that'd be interesting to sort of that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah,
but back then, I can imagine it probably would have been a little bit more difficult.
Oh, we live in an information age now, but this was only 14 or so years ago, so it wasn't really back in the Noah's Ark days.
The typewriter days.
Yes. But there wasn't as much information, you're right, and there also, the previous generation of European producers didn't speak English anywhere near as much as the current. So I can remember taking a translator my very first time. Yeah. With me, which is strange. You would never dream of doing that now. Sure. Unless you were going to somewhere like Hungary, perhaps you might. But, yeah, so...
do you find that like, as far as the global wine market, that has changed a little bit, and producers...
Yes.
At least, or maybe like the next generation, like their children or something like that, or they have someone working in the cellars who can speak English?
Absolutely. It's they realise it's important now.
I guess, as wine consumption in Europe, particularly, in France and Italy, has sort of started to go down, they've had to kind of reallocate and think, okay, we'll have to think a little bit more globally. And
it's very different, and they've got to start thinking about... courting important wine writers.
Sure.
Maybe courting's the wrong word, but certainly having a professional relationship.
Engaging with.
Sending some samples.
Sure.
Not just waiting for people to visit them, especially if you're starting. It's okay for Etienne Griveau. I don't think he needs to go out chasing anyone. People come to him, but he still has to engage with them.
Of course.
And that's something that a lot of the old school Burgundians have struggled with. And these days, it's all very well having a great wine, but if there's no international journalistic support for that wine, then it makes it a lot harder to sell the wine. It's a perfect storm if you've got a great wine at a very fair price and there's great reviews everywhere. And that's what we found when we started importing Keller. We quickly realised that the reviews around the world basically summarised that he was possibly the greatest producer of dry wines in Germany. Mm-hmm. And so once we started to show it to people in Australia who hadn't heard of it before, mm-hmm. they go, yeah, this wine's great. And they do a little bit of research. And of course, it's a Pandora's box. It just opens up. They see all these reviews from everyone. And they feel that they've made the right decision in liking the wine, in buying the wine, and of course they feel more confident to recommend the wine. So it's a snowball.
Do you find that the nature of wine communication has changed quite a lot, particularly in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, where you've got sommeliers, for example, being interviewed or being invited to write something, and they're given the opportunity to express their opinions, and then you've got wine bloggers or mm-hmm. people writing, and they're kind of given their opportunity to have their voice heard. That kind of access to information we're talking about, as far as the internet, is changing and democratizing to a certain extent the nature of wine communication, and that accessibility to the information is there.
It's changed so much. A person can give a wine, important Australian wine writer can give a wine 95 points. Although I did jokingly say this morning that 95 is the new bronze, because there is a little bit of high 90s scoring anesthesia going on.
I know that there's a running gag, on Twitter, for example, where people are saying, "Oh, I'm 98 points on that." Yeah,
that's
very
right.
Tongue in cheek.
Yes, yeah, or 102.
Yeah,
yeah. But nothing works more. And this is coming back to your point about democratization. I can't say it properly, but it's if we've had it happen with some of our products before. If you get 2 people giving it a great review in the same magazine, for example, that's like a perfect storm. It's fantastic. Whereas one person can do it and you get no result.
Sure.
So in one sense, it's weakening any individual, but it's strengthening in some ways the drive of the journalist or the commentator.
Sure.
Because if several of them talk about a wine, then people get interested. So it's changed quite a bit.
So what were your experiences when you first started importing? It was a couple of years you were just importing for the shop in Geelong, and then when you took the next step of taking the wine you were importing to market, how did you find that initially?
Well, I found it quite difficult. It's still difficult. And when we first started doing it, sommeliers weren't, I guess, as influential as they are now. In many, and they possibly weren't as good as they are now too, or certainly weren't as well educated. Some weren't as opinionated. But that's the same. You get opinionated people or overconfident people in all walks of life, I suppose.
Yeah, every element of the wine industry, for example.
Back, 20 years ago, there were a lot of wine merchants who were very influential, mm-hmm. and the influence has changed, or the power has changed. And there were a lot of wine merchants back then who were overconfident. I might have been one of them for a while. But, you know, there are some great sommeliers around now and some great restaurants who have fantastic wine programs and are doing great things to get basic good wine, interesting wine in front of people by the glass, and also, you know, at the high end doing great things too. So it's wonderful. It is sad that there aren't as many wine merchants like Armidale Cellars, Rathdown Cellars, you know, doing the things they do. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice if there was more of those. There's some small ones popping up that have little wine bars.
Yeah, that is sort of the new model, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and it's fantastic to see small ones like that doing like Seddon or Black Hearts in Smith Street with their
Black Market.
Black Market, yes. And it's fantastic to see all that. It's really exciting. Mm. Yeah, it's good.
I would have thought that initially, you know, in terms of starting with particularly Burgundy, there would have been opportunity where obviously Burgundy in general is very small volume and you know, there's great producers getting tiny allocations, so there would have been opportunity with that. But when did you start to expand and look at other regions?
Fairly quickly, because I've also got a love of Shiraz, so Rhone was a step, and dry Rieslings. I love great dry Rieslings from Germany, so that was fantastic as well. And Jura was probably before that too. I just happened to be having a holiday in Brittany, and the oysters in Brittany are probably the best I've had anywhere in the world. I know everyone's got different stories, but the water's so cold. I can imagine
it can be so fresh as well when you eat them there.
Oh, they're beautiful. We're staying at Pont-Aven, which is...
What doesn't go to Paris, I guess.
Yeah. Well, they just... That's why there's so many oyster restaurants around Montparnasse, because that's where the train stopped.
Right.
In the old days.
Yeah.
It came in from Normandy and Brittany. Mm. So all the seafood got unloaded there, and that's why there's all those walk-up oyster bars and
just
so on.
Shocking.
Yeah, so we went to a supermarket one day on this holiday and we bought a stack of oysters, and we were staying just near the Bellon River, so there was lots of bellons and all kinds of other oysters. And I happened to see a bottle of Tissot Jura. It was a Vin Jaune. It was a 98 on the shelf. And we bought a couple of live lobsters as well.
Wow.
So it was fantastic. So we put them in the freezer for a little sleep, and then we cooked them up and just served them warm. And we'd had them a few times, and this was towards the end of the week, and I'd got quite good at peeling the claw so that the meat, I didn't have to tear the meat. I just broke all the shell off, and so the claw looked like a claw, but it was just meat. So I was very proud of myself. Anyway, this particular night, our other the three other people there didn't like the Vin Jaune, and I thought they were crazy, and I was just in raptures over this wine. And then they decided they didn't want the oysters either. So I just had 3 dozen oysters to myself and a bottle of Vin Jaune.
Gosh.
And I was in heaven, and I was well and truly hooked from that day. Luckily...
What does that say about oysters being a very potent aphrodisiac?
Oh, look, I'm not saying a word.
Wow, and that's kind of like one of those experiences that you can have with wine and food that just stays with you. You know, I'm sure that a lot of people listening
forever
will have some of their own and love sharing those kind of experiences.
Oh, I'm sure everyone would have those experiences if you love food and wine and travel.
And that's what gives you that emotional connection with the wine, and that's probably what kind of led you to think about sort of bringing some of that in yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure, for certain. Yeah, so it's great. That's another thing that's changed these days in the wine trade. You know, whether we're an importer, a retailer, or a sommelier, or a restaurateur, or a chef, everyone's travelling.
Sure,
and
sure.
It's a great thing because everyone's got passion, everyone's got stories, everyone's finding things that they go, wow, they have an epiphany, and they go, I'm going to do that when I get back. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing. I love it.
It is. It's really exciting when you've got sommeliers, for example, going overseas, and going to the source as far as the wines, and then having the really strong connection, particularly with the food, and then coming back and sort of saying, oh God, I wish I could get that wine. Oh, it's imported. Awesome. And then just getting in contact with them, and you go, how did you find this? It's like, oh, I was in that region, or I had it in a
yes.
bar in Paris or something like that. And then you've got, as well, there sort of seems to be a starting just to be a generation of chefs who are kind of maybe going over and doing a 6-month stage in a restaurant in London, where they're introduced to something that they would have never seen back here in Australia, and then coming back and sort of thinking, God, I'd love to introduce that. And whether that's a sort of a particular style of cooking, or, an ingredient that's not particularly used very often,
or combining two things that
exactly, and kind of having
its ingredients or styles,
having a concept of like, this is the kind of venue I'd love to open. I don't know why we are not doing it already in Melbourne, and it is a really exciting. Like, I guess that is kind of one of the benefits of the combination of being able to travel a lot more easily now, and then having the access to the information to sort of be able to find that kind of thing out, and then introduce it to people who are just sort of going, great, here's a new thing. Yeah. Obviously, trends change quite quickly.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel sad about that restaurants have to reinvent themselves so quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
Because what you miss out on by doing that is the Francois of the world.
Yeah, of course.
Which are fantastic. A flower drum. I went there recently. It was just
Cafe
wonderful.
D'Estasio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was wonderful to revisit. It's wonderful to revisit those places.
Yeah.
Every so often. It's great.
It's like a great film or a great piece of music. It always has its charm, but it can still feel fresh.
Yeah.
Every time you listen or watch or look at a painting or something like that, there are so many parts of it that culminate in that experience that you can love and have that connection with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you are also started to bring in some bits and pieces from Italy as well. Did you? What led you to kind of Italy and having that connection?
That was a simple commercial decision in a way. Plus the fact that I love Barolo and other Italian wines.
Have you seen the interest in Italian wines increase quite a lot in the last few years?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more respect for Italian wine now than there was, say, 20 years ago. That's without doubt.
A lot to do with quality improving and again a new generation of people wanting to
that's right.
to do things differently and move away from the cooperative systems.
Yes, but we realised as importers that we weren't selling much to Italian restaurants. There's a whole market segment of restaurants that we're missing out on. Mm-hmm. So we did our list of producers to visit. Just out of interest, I wanted to visit Paolo Scavino because he's always listed as one of the top producers. And I plugged in Paolo Scavino into the GPS, and yes, it took me there, and we rocked up, and
it was the right place.
It was Scavino on the letterbox. It was a winery. We pulled in. The guy came out, young guy, said, "Oh, you're a bit late." And I looked at my watch, and we're only 5 minutes late, and I thought he's a bit cheeky. But anyway, he showed us around.
It must have been irony that Italians, that's practically early.
That's right, they would be, yeah. They wouldn't be ready normally. But anyway, he showed us around, and we sat down, and he said, "You want a taste?" Of course, yes. And it's all very nice and going well, and he pulled out the label, and we've gone, "Oh no, we're at the wrong place." It was Azelia that we were at, which is Luigi and Lorenzo Scavino.
But related or just
related and next door.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that happened to be an amazing moment because we asked them if they had an importer, and they said yes. And I went, "Oh, that's a shame. These wines are fantastic." Anyway, a bit further down the track, they said, "Would you be interested in our wines?" And I jumped at it. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those great moments because we love the wines. They had a good name. Their name is getting better. Mm-hmm. Every year since we started importing it. the name is better, and they're going further up the scale. And Galoni made a great comment in his most recent write-ups on the 11 Barolos. He said that more than probably anyone else in Barolo, Azelia they do make a wine that you can drink now, that's very easy to drink now, albeit youthful, and one that does keep. So it sort of drinks all the way through its evolution.
Look, I've told a lot of people already, but generally my philosophy is that a wine should be able to be drunk on release.
Yes. But
a great wine, you should taste it and say, I enjoy this now, but I want to see what it's like. This deserves to be kept. Yes. I can't tell you how many times I would just get so annoyed visiting a winery or going to a tasting and having someone say, oh, but you can't drink it now. It's like, you're selling it to me, therefore I can do whatever I want with it.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So that's exciting to sort of see that, wines like that.
Yes. So we've started putting together a little Italian portfolio of small producers, which is fantastic.
And, obviously the market's always changing and there's always, a whole new generation of sommeliers and young people opening up, as you say, these beautiful little wine shop, wine bar kind of things.
Yes.
There's fluctuation. So, there's always opportunity, but I do appreciate you making a bit of time in your busy schedule to come on the podcast. And people can visit your website and the social media thing. To give me all the details, please.
Yes. In a retail sense, there's the shop, which is randalls.net.au.
Mm-hmm.
Wholesale, it's heartandsoil.com.au. We've got a warehouse in Collingwood, and we're on Twitter. It's Randall's Imports, and that's probably enough information. Someone can find us in this day and age quite easily.
Well, the information's there.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, and obviously I look forward to trying some more wines like this lovely Wagner Stempel from the Rheinhessen. A new wine for you.
Yeah, classic dry Riesling, beautiful dry Riesling from a vineyard called Holberg, which has a granite subsoil, and he's very proud of his porphyry or porphyritic granite, and the wines are, as you can see, are really.
That's a different porphyry to the old Lindemann's porphyry.
Exactly. Not many people know that these days.
When I started working in Liquorland, 10 or 11 years ago, we still had it.
Yes, well, a distant memory, thank God.
Yeah. But it is delicious, and it's a Gros Givex. I always love the GGs.
Yeah, very powerful.
But cheers.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
As always, guys, thank you very much for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Intrepid Wino, and you can also follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. You can like my page on Facebook, facebook.com/Intrepid Wino. But definitely come and visit me on my website, www.intrepidwino.com, where you can not only download and listen to all of the previous episodes of the podcast, but you can also read some of my experiences and tasting notes and whatnot. The best way to download and listen to the podcast is via iTunes or Stitcher or even Player FM by subscribing. Subscribing really does help me out a lot. And what helps me out even more is rating and reviewing the podcast. I really love hearing feedback. I want to get more people involved. As I've mentioned before, I'm planning something a little bit special for episode 50, which was not far away, and that will allow listeners to the podcast to actually dial in via Skype and have a chat with me and appear on the podcast themselves. So definitely send me an email, thevincast@gmail.com, and even if you just want to say hello, I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, bye.